Everybody. I hope that you are well and also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today we'll be doing our grade 2 English lesson on adverbs. And before we start our lesson on adverbs, we're going to log into aplusstudents.ca. Once you've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of language arts, grade 2, and then we're going to scroll down up until we get to our chapter of adverbs. So our chapter is adverbs. Our subject is English language arts, grade 2. And the lessons that we're going to be focusing on under the chapter of adverbs is, does the adverb tell you how, when, or where? And to identify adverbs. All right. So we're doing adverbs, right? And when it comes to adverbs, right, an adverb is a word that tells you more about the verb, tells you about, it's almost like it modifies the verb, right? But it basically tells us more about the verb. So that's an adverb. And when it comes to an adverb, right, and then it tells you how, it tells you when, or it tells you even where. So an adverb is a word that tells you more about the verb, and it tells you how. This is now an adverb. The adverbs that they tell you how, it tells you when, or it tells you where. And when an adverb tells you how, right? So some of the adverbs that tells you how. These adverbs, they usually end in ly. These are not adverbs that tells you how. They usually end in ly. For example, the question is, how does she run? She runs quickly, which means that our adverb is quickly and it ends in ly. So the adverbs that tell you how, when, or where. And the first adverb, right, that tells us how, these adverbs they usually end in ly. And if you ask the question, how does she run? Then we can say she runs quickly. Some adverbs they tell you when. So some adverbs they tell you when. And if you look at the question, right, the question that's being asked is like saying, when does he leave? So when does he leave? And we can say he leaves soon. So our adverb is soon. So when does he leave? Soon. So the adverbs that tells you when, for example, when does he leave? And our answer is he leaves soon, which means that our adverb that tells us when is soon. And then some of our adverbs that tell you where. So the question is, where do they play? So where do they play? So where do they play? And the answer is they play outside. So we said that where do they play? They play outside, which means that outside is our adverb that tells us where. Right? So these are basically adverbs, and we see that an adverb is a word that tells you more about the verb. It tells you how, when, or where. Yes. So we see an adverb is a word that tells us more about the verb, and it basically tells you how, when, or where. And we are doing our tutorial lesson on aplusstudents.ca. Right? And if we look at this adverb, is it like adverb wheel? Right? We see that an adverb tells you how, when, or where. And if we look at some of these words, right, these are so it's nicely, seldom, clearly, often, softly, never, very, exactly, too, well, mostly, slowly, always. So this will, right, this adverb he will, it's like some of the words that we might use with, like as an adverb. You may use or identify. All right. And before we go to aplusstudents.ca, we said adverbs that tell you how, when, or where. And adverbs that tells us how. So the adverbs that tells us how, right? It's a few words like quietly, easily. Like remember we said adverbs that tells us why, the end in ly. So quietly, easily, carefully. All right. And if we look at the examples, then we have adverbs that tells us when. So adverbs that tells us when means it's now, it's today, it's later, it's yesterday, it's tomorrow. That is a few examples of adverbs that tell us when. So we said adverbs, right? When. So the adverbs when, they give you things like now, today, later, Wednesday, and remove. And remember, we said that adverbs, they tell us either how, when, or where. So we're just going to stop to the how, when, or where, right? And if we look at the adverbs that tells us where, it's like saying, yeah, there, inside, nearby, overseas, right? So now we're going to aplusstudents.ca. All right. So now we're going to aplusstudents.ca, and we're going to the first lesson that says, does the adverb tell you how, when, or where? So yeah, we need to look at the adverb in bold, right? And then we need to say if it tells us how, if it tells us when. All right. So we said an adverb is a verb that tells you more about the verb. And adverbs, they tell you how, they tell you when, or they tell you where. And we see that some adverbs that tells you how, right? These words, they end in ly. And we said some verbs that tells us how. These adverbs usually end in ly, like quickly, hurriedly. Some verbs that tells us when. It's like you are saying when, yesterday, this morning, tomorrow. And some adverbs tell you where, right? And in this case, it's telling us where to play. All right. So here it says, look at the adverb in bold. Does it tell you how or does it tell you where? Mr. Christensen left suddenly. So suddenly, does it tell us how or does it tell us where? Right? And now we're going to look at the word in bold. Does it tell you how or when? So Tina worked happily. All right. Also, if we look at this adverb in bold, right? Or the sentence, it says, does it tell you how or does it tell you when? So Tina worked happily, and the word happily, it tells us how. So how did Tina work happily? So is happily is our verb. So adverb, right? So now let's go to our test, where we're going to either say, does it tell you how, when, or where? Ashley's dog always barks. So now we need to say, does it tell you when or does it tell you where? So Ashley's dog always barks. Does it tell you when or does it tell you where? So Ashley's dog always barks. We can say that is when. When does it bark? It always barks. So when is correct. So an adverb that tells us how or where. He sang well. He sang well. We don't need to say if it's telling us how or if it's telling us where. So the question here is, does the adverb tell you how, when, or where? For example, he sang well. So he sang well. All right. So does look at the adverb. Does it tell you how or when? We said it tells you well. He sang well, so which means that it tells us. So adverbs that says that I sang well. How did you sing? I sang very well. All right. So now we need to look at the adverb in bold, which is well. And we said how. All right. The adverb that says Fred quietly reads. So Fred quietly reads. And quietly, that means that we need to say, All right. So here it says, does the adverb tells you how or when? Fred quietly reads, right? So how he reads quietly. And that is correct. So we need to look at the adverb in bold. Does it tell you how or does it tell you where? And we said, does it tell you how or where? For example, he waves sadly. The adverb in bold, he waves sadly. Does it tell you how? Does it tell you where? Sadly. And sadly tells you how, right? So it sadly tells you how. Yes, wonderful. So we need to say, look at the adverb in bold. Does it tell you when or does it tell you where? Does it tell you where or does it tell you when? The science club meets tomorrow. So the science club meets tomorrow. So it's like asking yourself, when are they meeting? They are meeting tomorrow. So tomorrow is when. All right. So now we're going to identify adverbs, right? It says we need to select the adverbs that tell you about the verb within bold. So hint, when does the snow begin? So we need to select the adverb that tells you about the verb in bold. Oopsie. It says, when does the show begin? The show begins soon, which means that soon is our adverb. So soon, it basically tells you how, when, tells you when. So when does the show begin? It's going to begin soon. So we need to select the adverb that tells you more about the verb in bold. It says Brenda worked happily. Brenda worked happily. And if we select the adverb, right, then our adverb is actually happily. Because remember, we said certain adverbs, they end in ly. So basically, how did Brenda work? Adverbs, it tells us how she worked happily. All right. Now let's go to a test. And this is now where we are going to identify adverbs, right? So it says we need to select the adverb that tells us about the verb in bold. It says the hint is, when does Mr. Finley teach? So when does Mr. Finley teach? Then it says Mr. Finley teaches today. So when does he teach? He teaches today. So our adverb, right? Is it today or is it teaches? What is our adverb? Is it today that tells us when is he going to teach, or is it teaches? And our adverb is, when does Mr. Finley teach? Today. And today is correct. So now the adverb, we need to select the adverb that tells us about the verb in bold. How are the kids playing? So how are the kids playing? So we're saying the kids are playing nicely. Nicely. So how are the kids playing? Then we can say our adverb is nicely. So we will say nicely. How the kids play. Nicely. So where or how did Lisa's friends fall? So where or how did Lisa's friends fall? So where or how did Lisa's friends fall? Lisa's friend fell down. So Lisa's friend fell down. So is it down? All right. So now it says where or how did Lisa's friend fall? And we can say Lisa's friend fell down. And down is correct. Right? All right, so that is an adverb, and we said adverbs, they tell you how, when, or where. They basically describe or modify the verb, right? Those are adverbs. So thank you very much, grade twos, for joining our class on adverbs, right? So basically, our adverbs, they tell you how, they tell you when, they tell you where, right? And they basically tell us more about the verb. So thank you very much, grade twos, for joining our class, right, on adverbs. And we said we identified adverbs as well as we were able to see if the adverb tells us how, when, or where. All right, till next time. Goodbye.